Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. This is my second video on Quantum Starfarer, that rules-light science fiction role-playing game written by Omer Golan-Joel and Richard Hazelwood and published by Stella Gamma Publishing. The first video was a little tutorial on the system and a play report of our very short first session. In that first session, we learned a few things about the world that is emerging through our play, and here's what we learned. First of all, the player characters. We have Val, who is run by my friend Dan. Val is a young woman, entrepreneur, who knew she wanted to make her own business by having a merchant ship that she flies around the frontier. In order to make her dream happen, she made a deal with a criminal syndicate. The criminal syndicate is the Shadow Vortex, and her contact that gave her the loan is Darius Voss, the crime boss, Darius Voss. We also met Aaron, who is an even younger man who is escaped from the Psy-Corps of the government that kind of controls most of known space, or at least the known space that the characters come from. At the time of that first playing, we didn't have a name for this government, but we decided this session to call it the Protectorate. But Aaron fled the Protectorate because he had been bred to be a psionic infiltrator for the government, and he didn't like that. So he left, he stowed away on Val's ship and was discovered and became crew. So it was a crew of 2 for a small merchant ship that's floating around on the frontier. In that first session, we also learned that the Shadow Vortex has a rival criminal syndicate known as the Ember Veil. And the Ember Veil, we had decided, was on Pyroxia Prime, which was a planet, and they operated out of Magma Haven, which was the spaceport on Pyroxia Prime. And then the only other things that we learned in that first session in terms of setting were that the characters started off at a planet called Xylaris. They were there at the settlement Glitterstone Ridge, delivering some supplies. And Glitterstone Ridge was a place that harvested lumina crystals. The only other thing I think that we learned about the setting was we were introduced to a woman by the name of Varanexia, who was an operative for Darius Voss. And she came to Val and Aaron and gave them a mission, a directive from Darius Voss, because Val sometimes has to do missions for the crime boss in order to pay down the debt that she owes on her ship. And this mission was basically to go to Pyroxia Prime and investigate an archaeological dig, which was being funded by the Protectorate. And apparently they had discovered something. The very small outpost on Pyroxia Prime had discovered something that was worth discovering, because the news was that the Protectorate was sending a stronger military presence to this outpost. And Darius Voss wanted the characters to infiltrate that outpost, try to figure out what it is that they discovered. That would have been gravy, though. The real reason for doing this was to implicate his rivals in the Ember Veil, because he wanted the Protectorate to get pissed off at the Ember Veil so they could basically kind of have it out, and then maybe Darius Voss and the Shadow Vortex would have a stronger hold in the frontier. So that first session involved those characters, Val and Aaron, kind of going in, making a little bit of a stink, and getting out, hoping that that would satisfy Darius Voss. You could have learned all of that by watching the previous video, but I wanted to mention it here because I wanted to paint a little bit of a picture of the world that's kind of emerging and remind my listeners of that. And now that we have that in place, that's what we had to work with. Let me talk a little bit about the situation of play this time around. We weren't supposed to be doing this past week. We were supposed to be playing in my wife's Ravenloft game, her 5th edition game, but unfortunately we had some issues come up and we had to cancel that particular game. And so we were left with a smaller group of people who were willing to game that day. Those happened to be Dan and Mike. So We had two of the players from the original session there, and they both expressed an interest in playing Quantum Starfarer again. And I pitched it to our other two players that were present that day. Those were Jen and Adolfo. And they both said, yeah, that sounds like fun. Let's go ahead and do that. Now, I want to stress, when I sat down to play, Quantum Starfarer was not something that I had in my mind at all at that particular moment in time. I didn't have anything in mind for any game at that particular moment in time because the cancellation for Ravenloft was pretty late in the game. We were pretty late in the day. So I was sitting down just kind of saying, I don't know, I want a game. And people were like, oh, we want a game too. So again, just like the first time that we played this game, it was a little bit seat of my pants. And so I want to, in a sense, talk through what that was like and what the process was like in case it's useful or instructive, or in case there's something there to critique too, right? After we determined that, yeah, this is a game people can quickly make characters in, I turned it over to my two new players, Jen and Adolfo, to make characters. The characters that they came up with are as follows. First, we have Hazel Blackburn. That's Jen's character. And Hazel is somebody who grew up rough and tumble and with a short temper and is combative and has combat skills and is a martial artist. And she kind of hires herself out as muscle. I asked Jen, does she have a military background? And she said, no, she does not. She just learned how to fight. You know, she's trained. She's taken martial arts lessons from somebody at some point. But for the most part, she just kind of picked it up along the way through a rough and tumble life. Adolfo made this character, Van Duplo. It strikes me how much the spirit of Han Solo flies around any science fiction game that you play. As I mentioned in the first session, Val has a little bit of Han Solo about her in terms of her setup with the crime lord, kind of like a Jabba the Hutt kind of relationship, right, with Darius Voss and all of that. But that character is a little bit more rooted in Mal from Firefly, but there's still a little bit of Han Solo about her, right? Where here, Van Duplo is very much a gag name, right? It's not Han, but it's Van, and it's not Solo, it's Duplo, right? So Adolfo is always close to a pun, right? And so he used that name to kind of give that kind of like a scoundrel kind of feeling. And his character is quite literally, quite specifically a thief. He's kind of con man. He is sneaky. He's a pickpocket. He's a fence, you know, all of those things. In that way, I guess that he has some Han Solo about him, but he's also has a little bit of like Villa from Blake 7 in him, but without the cowardice, right? So those are the two new characters that we had joining the crew. And again, I told the players, we are skipping time from last time. We're not going to pick up right where we left off. We're going to assume that that first mission is a little ways behind you. And, you know, you guys were in need of crew because you have this merchant ship, but you only had a crew of 2. So you guys are in need of a crew. I want to stress, while these characters were being made, I still didn't have a clear idea of what I was going to run. And let me share one thing that I did while they were making characters and I was kind of listening to them. I did one thing to prep. First, I pulled down my Stars Without Number again, thinking, okay, there's some random tables there for patrons and planets and governments and adventure generation and all of that. I said, maybe I'll have to, like, you know, work with those tables to come up with something. I also decided, you know, let me make my own table. I don't have to rely on their table. I can come up with my own table. And so what I did was they were making characters is that I kind of drew on the things that we'd already established through play to make a little like random encounter table, essentially, which I was really using as kind of an adventure startup table. 1 through 6. This is what I put on the table. Number 1, an Imperial check. That means that if I rolled that on the table, the adventure would start with them flying through space and Protectorate ships coming in and just doing a random check. And we'd see where that would take us. Number 2, the Ember Veil. So the idea that they would run into Embervale operatives and that there might be some friction, who knows? I wasn't sure exactly how the Embervale played into it, but I would say an Embervale encounter. Number 3, a damaged ship in need of help. And again, I figured they'd be flying through space and they'd get some sort of distress call, or they encounter some sort of wreckage. There would be somebody on there looking for help, or at least a distress call that would be drawing them towards something. So that was number 3 on my table. Number 4, it's a trap. This was something that just popped into mind from an old episode of Firefly, where there was, I think it was a distress call too, that drew folks in, but it was all an elaborate trap to kind of like steal the vessel and all of that. Number 5, Shadow Vortex. I put, it's an encounter with the Shadow Vortex, and they press the group into service in some way. They put some sort of pressure on Val and her crew to do something for them, maybe to get them out of a jam that they're currently in. And on number 6, I put roll twice. So I made that table as they were making characters. When I was done, and when they seemed to be done making characters, that's when I started asking questions, right? And so that's when I asked Jen, like, does your character have a military background? And then I asked her, okay, so how did she come to be a part of the crew? And I asked Jen, but I told the others that you guys can weigh in on that. And Jen described how she basically noticed that they were understaffed when they were at some port somewhere. She basically kind of like confidently walked up and said, hey, you guys are hiring me. Like, you guys are shorthanded. You guys are in a dangerous area. You need somebody who can handle themselves. So I'm going to hire myself out as like a, you know, as like a hired gun. And Val was like, wait, like, when you say hired out as a hired gun, I don't need muscle. I run a legitimate business. This is not, I'm not a crook. You're like, I didn't say anything about being a crook. You just look like you need protection. It's like, all right, but as long as you understand that, yeah, if I need muscle, I mostly need you to load and unload the ship, because that's what we are. We're a merchant ship. We're not criminals. And, you know, Hazel was like, all right, but are you hiring me? And she's like, yes, I'll hire you as a dockhand. All right, great. And so then I asked Adolfo, well, how did you join the crew? And Adolfo was like, I stowed away, which is fine. That's a fine answer. But what I thought was funny about that is that we had already talked about how Aaron had stowed away on the ship. When Adolfo said, I stowed away on the ship, that's the moment where I knew where we were beginning the session. Now that we knew where we were starting, I wanted to know what was going on and what was about to happen. So I told Adolfo, all right, hold on to that thought. Let's turn over to Val, who's the ship captain. And I said, okay, Val, let me ask you a question. What is it that you are doing right now? What is it that you are transporting? I know that you're on your ship, but where are you headed right now? And I said, and you don't know Van Duplo, right? You haven't met him yet, but where is your crew headed right now? And so he's like, you know what? I don't know why, but I was thinking that Val's kind of stressed because we're transporting sheep. We have a hold full of sheep. And I'm like, okay, cool. So where are you transporting them to? And I said, you know, and then that's where I kind of like responded to what he told me. I said, I don't know why, but I feel like if you're transporting sheep, I think you need to take them to some sort of settlement, some sort of colony world that needs livestock. And I said, and for some reason, a religious community is popping into mind. I just basically said, I'm imagining space Puritans, essentially, who have ventured out into semi-charted space to a planet that has not yet been fully explored, and there's no other settlement on there, and they've set up a new community out there. And I was like, I need some names. What are some names? I was about to kind of just come up with something for myself, but one of the players, I forget who it was, said, what about New Providence? I'm like, it's a little on the nose, but let's do it. New Providence is the name of the settlement. And I'm pretty sure it was Dan, because then I was like, all right, who's the religious leader? Because you met a religious leader when you were at a frontier outpost about to leave, and she made contact with you because you were like the last merchant on her way out. She had a last minute need for livestock. She gave you their position and said, if you can deliver livestock for me out there, I'll pay you handsomely. And, you know, that's how the agreement was made. And it was Dan who said, I think her name was Goody Winthrop. Okay, again, a little bit on the nose for space Puritans, but I don't mind that. So we said, okay, that's it. You're delivering sheep to New Providence, way out in the frontier of the frontier, to Goody Winthrop and her community, her religious community. And Val's a little bit anxious about that because there's like sheep poop all over her ship's hold. It's in that situation. You guys have been hanging out in the ship for a while. You guys are in hyperspace right now, and you're sitting around the mess hall having your meal when Van Duplo, this guy that you don't know, walks out and says, "Hey, what's for dinner?" And at that point, of course, things get tense. People stand up. They don't do the thing where they kind of pull guns on each other and hold them at their heads and kind of like do a stare down, where it's just kind of like this power dynamic between the players, even more so than the characters that I've seen sometimes happen in role-playing game situations like this. But you know, Hazel, who is basically security on the ship, her hand does go to her blaster. The others are kind of wary. Van Duplo is not displaying any weapons though, and he's like, "Hey, you know, consider this an interview. I think I noticed that you guys are low on crew, and maybe people like you would be interested in people with talents like mine. If you need things procured, if you need things." And Val was like, "I am not a criminal. We're not a criminal operation. We're a legitimate merchant crew." And it's like, "Yeah, I understand, but," and it kind of went like that and for a little while. And then, you know, Hazel was like, "You want I should space him?" It's like, "Well, you need to come out of hyperspace before you decide to space him." You know, I don't think Val was seriously considering that as an option, but she was like, you are off this ship the moment we get where we're going. You are off this ship, you know, and it was kind of tense like that. And then I said, "Okay, your alarm goes off and you have to drop out of, it's an alarm telling you that you are 5 minutes from dropping out of hyperspace." And at that point, I rolled on my little 1d6 chart that I made because I wasn't sure what they were going to find when they got there. I knew the settlement they were heading towards and the people they were planning on dealing with, but I wasn't sure if there was something else going on there. So I rolled a d6 on my table and I rolled a 2, which is the Ember Veil. So I'm like, we are dealing with a rival criminal faction, the faction that they had messed with in Pyroxia Prime. Maybe they will know her, maybe they won't, but it's the same organization that they're going to be dealing with. And at that point, a little bit of a story clicked into place. What is the Ember Veil doing way out here in the middle of nowhere? I'm like, well, these Ember Veil operatives are essentially kind of space pirates, space rogues. One of them was probably present in whatever tavern, cantina type environment Goody, Winthrop, and Val had made their deal in. They had probably gleaned some information about as to where they were going, and they thought these are easy marks. So I basically said that, you know, 2 small pirate ships, kind of like re-outfitted scout ships, if you want to think of Traveler, but made for piracy. They had kind of, the Ember Veil had sent the small contingent of 2 ships to basically just go out to the frontier and plunder these colonists. With that decision in mind, I said, "What are you guys gonna do?" So Val, of course, went up to the cockpit to get ready to fly the ship down, and she tried to communicate with the settlement. And I said, "You try to communicate with the settlement and nobody responds." And I kind of like made myself a little table. There's a chance that Goody Winthrop will respond, but basically with a gun to her head, or that nobody would respond, or that one of the Ember Veil would respond. So I rolled the no response option. And so that's what they got. They got no immediate response. Curious about that, she proceeded to fly towards the settlement, come into orbit and fly towards the settlement. I then asked the others what they were doing. Hazel basically shadowed Van the whole time. She was basically, "You're not leaving my side," keeping an eye on him. And it's like, "You're coming with me. You're going to help me secure those sheep because we're going to be, you know, shoveling sheep poop pretty soon, and you're going to do it and you're going to like it." And he's like, "Yeah, whatever you need, you know, for me to convince you that I should be part of your crew." It's like, "Yeah, whatever." So they went to do that. And then I asked Mike what Aaron was doing, and Aaron said, you know, I'm going to make myself useful by going around and checking on things, just technical things. He doesn't have a lot of skills, but he tries to make himself useful on the ship by just doing maintenance on the ship. I said, "Okay, that's fine, but is there anything in particular you're doing?" When he heard that Val wasn't getting a response to the hail attempt, he said, "You know what, I'm going to try to scan the settlement, see if I see anything." Upon doing the scan, Aaron was able to get a sense of the topography of the area. He was also able to get images of the settlement. The topography was rolling hills with, grasslands, right? And on top of the largest of the hills sat the settlement of New Providence. Again, Space Puritans, so of course, city upon a hill. The settlement was a series of prefab homes kind of clustered around a church. The church was a dome, kind of an igloo kind of shaped dome, but the front of it had this kind of like spire that with these two swooping lines that came up in a point, almost like the ray of a star or something like that, with smaller rays coming a lot, out of the front and kind of wrapping around the kind of sort of igloo-ish structure. Towards the southern end of this very large hill was the colony ship, along with the two smaller pirate ships that were kind of clustered around it. And actually, this is kind of like the hill had this kind of like gentle slope that came up from the south. They were sort of at the bottom of that slope. Needless to say, they detected the two ships, these two pirate ships, and Val immediately was like, okay, I need to try to not get detected. There was also a river that flowed through the hills and kind of wrapped its way around the large hill where the settlement sat. So she was going to drop under the hills and kind of fly between the hills till she got to the river, and then kind of follow the contour of the river, hoping that that would place her low enough so she would not be detected by anybody that might be trying to scan for somebody. I had her make a space roll as kind of like the equivalent of a stealth roll to not be seen. Unfortunately, she failed the opposed roll, and as she was moving around one of the hills and getting towards the river, she noticed that there was one of the two pirate vessels had taken off and was moving to intercept her. So at that point, we got to use the ship combat skills, which we didn't get to use in the previous session. I didn't get a chance to brush up on them really that well before we started play, so I took a very quick skim of it and did my best to apply them. I think I did some stuff wrong, but I think I got close enough. And I've got to say that it was actually, I thought, a lot of fun. It was very simple. It was a lot of fun. Space combat begins with rolling a d6 plus a maneuvering attribute that goes along with the individual ships, plus the character's space skill. And in the case of Val, she's an ace, so I think she gets an additional +1 or +2 to that. And whoever wins that roll-off attempt will actually have advantageous position in the combat and could attack normally. Anybody who fails that advantageous position roll, I think, attacks at -3 to their die roll, which is a pretty significant penalty. So Val's very good at this because of that ace talent that she has, or that ace trait that she has. So she got position, and we got into kind of a dogfight situation. Now, we needed somebody at the guns, right? So she called back and told Hazel, man the laser and whatnot. So she got behind the laser and she started firing at the ship that was coming in. Duplo ran over to their missile bay and started manning the missile launcher. Now, I don't have a blow-by-blow of how this combat went, but let's just say that because of the superior position, the two combatants were able to score significant hits. There was a breach to their hull that happened. There was also damage done to one of the other ship's weapons. Then there was a missile shot that destroyed the ship. It just exploded. The PC's ship flew right through the explosion debris and all of that and what have you. Now, at that point, Aaron said that he was going to be scanning for the other ship, and he failed his roll. And this is the moment when Aaron said, you know what, I'm going to use one of my hero points. Now, in this game, every player gets 2 hero points at the start of every session. And the players also have a pool of hero points that's 1 for each player that's playing. So in this case, it was a pool of 4 that they could draw on as long as there was enough of a consensus to draw on it for any specific thing. So Mike drew on one of Aaron's hero points to remake that roll, and good that he did, because the other ship had taken off and was coming up on them at an angle and would have gotten a surprise shot if he hadn't detected it. Detecting it and reporting that to Val allowed Val to make a pilot roll, and she got advantageous position on that after some exchange back and forth, there was a couple of things that happened. One, despite the -3, the pirate ship got a good shot on the PC ship and blew open the hold. So the sheep were blown out of there. So much for their cargo. I rolled, and there were a handful of sheep, really like 3 sheep, that managed to survive because they were in nooks and crannies where they got kind of slammed against a wall or whatever, but they didn't get sucked out by the decompression. But they lost that. However, they were able to damage the other ship's engines, and the other ship went careening into the side of a hill and crashed. It didn't explode, but it crashed. It remained mostly intact. The players decided that they were going to circle over to the crashed vessel and land nearby, and they were going to approach the vessel to see if they could get any salvage. In particular, they wanted to know if they can get parts to maybe repair their own ship. I made a couple of rolls. Again, I could just make these decisions, but I like to be surprised by what's going to happen. So first, I rolled to see whether or not the ship was dangerous in terms of its condition. I did determine that there was a radiation leak, but the radiation leak was mostly contained. So the ship was leaking some radiation, but it wasn't so much that it would be immediately harmful to anybody coming into the ship. Also, the ship had suffered a breach, and I decided that that was to the cockpit, actually. So the pilot of the vessel was strapped in, but looked dead as the players kind of approached. Aaron was scanning with his hand scanner. He told me the whole list of things that he could scan for, and I said, you have to pick one that you're scanning per round. Like, you can't just like determine everything. He said, okay, well, I'm gonna check for radiation. That's the first thing he said. And so I told him what I already told you, and that's the radiation situation, the slight leakage and all of that. They immediately became worried about whether or not they had enough like anti-rad pills to take to deal with any damage they might take. They did not have any of those, but they still approached cautiously. Val approached the cockpit and went to kind of check the pilot, and the pilot was unconscious. Well, was feigning consciousness. He was badly damaged. He was kind of burned and jostled and stuff, but he had enough in him to have kind of like pulled a pistol that he was holding, and when Val approached, he tried to shoot her. He missed. I gave him a significant minus because of his condition. So he missed, the shot went wild, and she stepped back and shot him and killed him, and then was like, he shot first, because it's interesting. Val's she's not cold-blooded. She's not a criminal. So Dan actually felt a little bit of like concern that Val killed somebody who was kind of strapped down. She was like, kind of dealing with that when I think it was Aaron who went up and searched the body, and he said specifically, I'm looking for any signifying marks. And I said, you do find signifying marks, and that's when they were able to determine that these guys were associated with the Ember Veil. So like, okay, all right. So they had that in mind. They at that point figured out these guys were here to plunder this colony. Duplo and Hazel went into the ship. Duplo went in first, and he said, I'm looking for the captain's quarters, essentially. I said, all right, you would know where that is roughly with this make of ship. So he went there, and he found a couple of things. He found a holy symbol of like a man in gold, kind of in a crucifix position, but instead of like sitting on a crucifix, he just had his arms out and his head up, and there was this kind of like crown of like solar rays like projecting from the head and from the hands. He also had like solar rays projecting from that. We determined at that point that these space Puritans worshiped the Star King, is this kind of like celestial force that like, gives the sacrifice of his own body as a life-sustaining energy for life all over the galaxy. He basically scored that, right? He also found a safe. He asked if there was a safe. I said, of course there is. So then he set about trying to crack the safe. In the meantime, Hazel went into the ship. She saw him and what he was doing in that room, but she was searching to see if there was anybody who was still alive on the ship. And she went into the common area, which was adjoining engineering. Basically, there was a hatch that would open that would let you walk down a short hall to go to engineering. And so she was kind of standing guard there. And at that point, Val came to join her, and they heard a banging coming from the door to engineering, and there was this brief moment where Hazel was like, I think I'll open the door. And I think it was Val said, hold on. That's the weight engineering. That's where Aaron said that the radiation was. Val went over to the door panel and basically went to make sure that it could not be open. And there were some opposed rolls that were made, and she got it just. And so I told her, you basically shut down the opening mechanism right when you see that it's about to whir and to actually open. That shut down that situation. And right around the same time, I think that Aaron by this point went to go join Duplo and kind of watch what he was doing. And Duplo at that point had failed to crack the safe, so he pulled out a blowtorch to that could cut through the hull of ships to actually cut through the safe. And I'm like, you need to make a roll, because it's not to open it. You're gonna crack it open, no problem with that blowtorch, but you might damage what's inside. He made it and did not damage what was inside. And he found 5,000 credits and he found some data chips. So he took those. All right. So with that, they had finished this little part of the adventure and they decided to walk away from the ship. It was still too dangerous. They didn't know if the leak would become worse or whatnot, so they decided to go back to their ship. And at that point, they got back in and they did follow the contour of the river, and they landed their ship below, at the foot of the large hill where the settlement was. So then two things happened. One, Val told Aaron and Duplo to get busy patching the hole in the hold, so if they had to take off, they could take off. And we determined that they probably had enough. If they took paneling off the walls and off the floors and used some spare parts that they had, that they could basically do enough of a patch job to be able to take off. And so they got busy doing that. In the meantime, Hazel and Val would go up the hill on its steepest side, drop, to prone position and pull out binoculars or, macro viewers or whatever to be able to scan and see what was going on in the settlement. They noticed that there were no colonists about. They noticed that there were 3 pirates that were standing at kind of strategic positions in the common area, watching the different buildings, standing guard. And they noticed that there was a man who looked in charge, and he was losing his mind, obviously upset about what had happened to their ships. And he was cursing and venting at 3 other men that were standing in front of him. And behind him, there were 2 men that were standing guard at either side of the door into the church. And this was all taking place basically right outside the church. So in the immediate area that they were watching, they saw 6 pirates, one of them the leader, 2 guards for the church, and the other 3 that were kind of being yelled at. And then they saw another 3 pirates that were further into the town. Hazel was like, I'd love to take a shot at that leader. And they're like, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of them. But at some point, the leader sent off the other 3 and he pointed to the colony ship. And those 3 ran over to the colony ship, which left the leader and the 2 guards by the church. And then, of course, the other backups, but they were deeper into the town. So at that point, again, 2 things happened. Val got on her communicator and told the guys fixing the ship, we need backup. Things are about to go down. Hazel took a shot at the leader and hit him, but didn't kill him. And I counted that as a surprise round. I think Val took a shot too. I don't remember if she missed or whatever. I know the distance was too great. That's right, because Val only had a pistol and Hazel had a carbine. So Hazel had a good beat on them, and she also had cover because she was prone. So she shot him. Val, after giving her order, she ran down the hill and started running along the base of the hill towards the colony ship. She did not want those pirates to get on the colony ship. So she was booking it in that direction. The 2 guys fixing the ship, Duplo ran up to join Hazel at the top of the hill to fight off the guys that were by the church, whereas Aaron ran after Val to go to the colony ship. That's how that went. So we had 2 different kind of settings. And then basically what ensued was a firefight. I think I'll just give you the highlights of what happened. In terms of the situation up on top of the hill, Val had the advantage of range and cover. We had established that they were 300 feet away or something like that from them. So those guys, those pirates, well, first of all, in terms of the leader, right after the surprise round where he got hit and didn't get killed, he tried to dive into the church. And as he was diving into the church, Hazel took another shot, hit him solidly, but the momentum of his jump kept him going into the church, and he flew into the church, right? So they couldn't tell what happened to him. The two guards that were standing by the church then turned and started running towards Hazel. And they were just going to try to get close enough to be able to gun her down. In the meantime, she could be taking paw shots at them as they were coming, and she was hitting them and damaging them, but not taking them down, right? And then the other three that were guarding in the town, they ran from the town to reinforce the guys that were running up on her. So there was that situation. When Duplo got to the top, Duplo started joining in the combat, and he started getting some really good hits with his blaster pistol. Actually, he's not a wonderful shot, but he was rolling well, and he used some hero points along the way. And essentially they were able to kind of really weaken them significantly. None of them ever got close enough to them to really land a shot on either of the two of them, although it was a little bit, it almost got to that point, but not quite. Also, one of the things that helped them out is that partway through the fight, as the three reinforcements were coming from the town, blaster fire started coming from the church at those guys, right? So their attention was kind of split. So they were getting some help from a friendly in the church, right? So that's how that started to turn up. In terms of what was going on closer to the ships, Aaron and Val got there, and they got into blaster fire. They had to get in closer quarters because both of them only had blaster pistols. So they took some risks, and they got close, and there was this one moment in the fight where Aaron took a hit. He took a hard hit and lost a lot of stamina and some lifeblood. He decided not to use his healing because he hadn't taken that much life. His psionic ability of regeneration, that's what he didn't use. His psionic ability of regeneration regenerates lifeblood, but not stamina. So he decided not to use it, and then he got hit again for a massive blow that would have just outright killed him. So I was getting ready to proclaim the first death of the campaign when Jen says, and it was kind of funny, I could tell it seemed, and you know, Jen is can be jokey about this, so I'm not sure how tentative she was, but she kind of tentatively said, by the way, just so you know, hero points can be used to re-roll your own rolls, but they can also be used to force the game masters to re-roll theirs. I, of course, don't take affront to that sort of thing. I was like, oh, really? All right. Well, are you going to do that? Everybody's like, yes. So they forced me to re-roll my badass roll that I used to kill Aaron. And I rolled, and I still hit him. But I didn't crit. You know, not that there's official crits in the game, but I didn't roll as much damage as I did before. And he was damaged, but not dead. And so that was nice. Despite that close call, they were able to take out two of the guys. No, they were able to take out one of the guys that was heading towards a ship. They damaged another guy. And then I was looking at my time at the time. We were late in the session. And I knew that something had happened. That there was a group of the colonists that had been able to flee the colony and draw some help from another settlement that was only kind of partially, I know I said that there were no other settlements on this planet, but no other major settlements. I haven't worked out the backstory behind this yet, but I knew that there was kind of like a lone settler running this kind of ranch where there were these kind of like, he was kind of like raising and training axe beaks, like from Dungeons and Dragons, essentially, like feathered tauntauns, essentially. And I figured that this is a guy that maybe came with the colonists for some sort of like maybe funding reason background. There was some relationship that he had with the colony, but he didn't quite get along fully with the colony. So he had this kind of like ranch off in another section of this area. And the colonists had fled there, and they had been able to basically procure a bunch of axe beaks and some weapons. and they were coming back to kind of like liberate the colony, right? So right as the battles were going, and based on the time, and I knew I had to wrap up the session, I just decided that this cavalry was showing up. And then I did roll how it went for them in the combat, and they were able to basically take care of, as they kind of stampeded in, they gutted one of the guys that Val and Aaron were fighting, like the axe beat like landed on his chest and like knocked him to the ground and ripped them open. The other guy was just kind of jostled by everybody else, but Aaron and Val took the opportunity while they were being jostled to run up and like pull guns on him, and he basically surrendered at that point. And on the other side, I was keeping track of the friendly fire that was coming from the church, and that turned out to be Goody Winthrop, who took a couple of bad blows, and she was one lifeblood away from dying. But before they, when I think it was Duplo took out the last guy on that side before the axe beaks made it to that side of the settlement, Goody Proctor came out holding a golden rod, a golden staff with that Star King kind of symbol at the edge of it, holding the leader's blaster carbine, and kind of like unsteady, right? Because she came out to make a show, of defiance, but she was really on her last legs. But with that, the pirates surrendered or died. I think there was only one pirate surviving, and the colony was saved, right? So at that point, I had the players go around and give me one last thing that they were going to do or say, right? Adolfo said that Duplo was going to present Goody Winthrop with the relic or the statue that he had found in the captain's quarters. He presented to her, and he said, praised Val and her leadership for bringing us to the moment where they can return this to her. She took, Goody Winthrop took it graciously back. Aaron had some healing to do, and I forget which specific interactions he kind of had at the end of all of this. Hazel, also some interactions with the rest of the party about things, but it was Val who basically said that she had a final meeting with Goody Winthrop where she apologized for not bringing the sheep, and Goody Winthrop was like, it was Providence that led us to meet, and that that led me to hire you to bring me those sheep, and you may not have brought me sheep, but you have brought us salvation. And that is all the work of the Star King. So the Star King has worked through you to save our settlement. And we're like, well, what about the resources that you need in terms of livestock to make this happen? It's like the Star King will work it out. And then we rolled to see how many female and male sheep there were, and I rolled and they were all female. So the players were kind of laughing and saying like, Star King doesn't pan out. But then we rolled to see if any of them were pregnant. I was like, if I roll a 1 on the die, they were pregnant, and one of them was indeed pregnant. So the Star King might have still provided something there, but Val was like, well, if you ever need anything, you can call on us. And Goody Winthrop was like, well, it will be difficult for us to call you based on where we are and based on communications as they are. That's not really possible. But if you ever need a safe haven, you know where to find us, And they're like, okay, all right. So again, Goody Winthrop was laying on Providence and laying on the religion and the Star King and all that really, really thick, to the point where I think I noticed some of the players like saying like, all right, let's get out of here. But whatever. It was a nice end to the night. So some reflections on Quantum Starfarer. Man, once again, a lot of fun. Very quick to start up. The low investment in terms of like, complicated rules means that I can just step into it and be creative And it lets me be creative in a way where it's like, rather than having my brain process rules and system, which I like rules and system, don't get me wrong, I like a game that has a lot of complexity to it, but every once in a while I just need a game that allows me to take that kind of brain activity and dedicate it to just being able to fully listen to what my players are doing and saying and asking, and allowing myself to bounce off of what they're doing, but also bounce off of things that we've done in previous sessions to kind of generate something new in the moment. I mean, none of this was scripted. None of it was scripted. You know, like the most scripting that I did was the moment where I decided that the cavalry were right in, but the results, the outcome of the cavalry was not scripted. If the players had not weakened those the numbers of the pirates when that cavalry came in, they could well have been gunned down by the superior numbers, not to mention the two ships, right? So nothing was scripted except me deciding that, okay, the session's almost over, so better have this group come in to kind of like bring the obvious outcome of what is happening tonight to a close so that we can go to sleep, right? But beyond that, everything was riffing. Like, it was just, again, and it was a lot of fun, and it's just interesting to be able to step into a situation and not know, right? Not know. And you know, it's not like, again, this is just the way that I play now. It's the way that I've been slowly stepping towards this style of play for a good 5 to 8 years or something like that. And you know, I've been able to do so more confidently after listening to a lot of what Ron Edwards has to say about gaming and adept play, and to some degree Justin Alexander as well, and others. Those have been the folks that have been most instructive to me in terms of like how to play in this way and play in this way confidently. And you know, I think I always played like this to a large extent, but it almost felt like I was just coming short, because when the standard is, or started to become beautifully detailed and, you know, largely prescribed kind of adventure paths that walk players through an experience that the game master is sort of providing with a lot of authorial kind of mastery, and scenes are being set up for players to interact with very specific scenes in very specific places, and maybe with a handful of foreseen outcomes. Like, when that becomes the standard that's put out by the publishing industry, you're like, man, if I'm not doing that, I'm not really doing it. But then when you try to do that, at least when I try to like execute those things, it's hard, and ultimately often feels boring to me, right? So, you know, I'm really grateful to those folks who have modeled this approach to me and signaled that it is, you know, a very powerful approach and a very fun approach, and ultimately one that's more exciting, at least for me, and I think for a lot of my players as well. So anyway, just a reflection. Well, folks, that's it. Thanks again for sticking it out to the end. You know, I'm about to say my closing mantra that I always use, and it hits with a heightened sense of it for me this time, because one of the reasons that I haven't posted a lot in a while is because I've been a little sick. I had a really bad norovirus about a week ago, and a couple of other things, nothing serious, but you know, my health wasn't that good for a couple of weeks. And then I've also had friends in my life who's again continue to struggle with health. So, you know, I really mean it when I say that I wish you good health. I wish you good cheer. I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.